Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I would like to welcome you to episode 69 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today it is my distinct pleasure to have my good friend and colleague Joe Oringel, co-founder of Visual Riskiq, who will visit with us today on transaction monitoring. I hope you enjoy this episode and you'll come back.
Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and welcome to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today it's my distinct privilege to have my good friend and colleague Joe Oringel visit with me. Hello, Joe.
Hi, Tom. Good morning.
I am wearing my Team USA jersey. We're recording this on Monday the 16th, and hopefully the U.S. will have a big win tonight or later on this afternoon. So hope you're going to enjoy the game. I met Joe, several years ago, and he had an interesting idea / proposition for me. In a minute, I'm going to ask Joe to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about himself and his company. But he has a background in auditing, and from that he developed some interest in transaction monitoring. And he and I met because he wanted to see if transaction monitoring was a tool that would lend itself to FCPA compliance and specifically compliance programs. And he and I have worked on this idea over the past several years, and we've come up with something that we think is interesting. But I thought, Joe, maybe in this episode we could introduce the topic. I've visited with other people on my podcast, specifically Vince Walden from E&I, about transaction monitoring. But I see this really as not even what may have been a cutting-edge technique, but is now moving just towards sort of a mainstream best practice. So with that very long introduction, once again, welcome on coming on board the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us. But why don't you introduce yourself and tell folks kind of your versions of how you and I got together.
Sure, Tom. Thank you. Well, as many folks know, Visual Riskiq is in the continuous monitoring business. What that means is we implement continuous monitoring technology really from all vendors to solve specific business problems. We started, my partner Kim Jones is based in Austin, Texas, and Kim and I were working together inside PricewaterhouseCoopers back 2005, 2006. And we were studying all of the audit software that was available in the market, everything from work paper software to data analysis to risk assessment to continuous monitoring. And in evaluating how those tools could be used inside an internal audit services practice, we became very enthusiastic about the capabilities of this class of software called continuous monitoring. Personally, I've always been involved in data analytics inside of internal audit, taking data from various information systems and bringing it together to send exceptions out to various folks to review. But the history of Visual Riskiq is all about really using the continuous monitoring technology to solve business problems.
One of the things that really intrigued me about your approach and Kim's approach is, if it's not clear, you guys are not lawyers. And you don't come at things really from a legal perspective. You come at it really from an auditing and that type of professional training and perspective. And Kim, comes at it yet from a different angle, really from the software tech angle. And once again, Visual Riskiq and in meeting you guys and working with you guys, I've seen the value of bringing disciplines other than legal to the compliance space because you think through things in a different way and you see things in a different way. And some of the projects that you and Kim have worked on with your software have been completely outside the compliance space, yet in you talking to me about them, it was clear they did have a lot of application. So what I'm specifically thinking about the work you did with some charitable organizations just to help them organize. And so why don't you talk about that to the extent you can and really how that led to some of the things that you and I have been working on.
Certainly. Well, thanks. I get excited when I think about the things that we do in the nonprofit space. My wife worked as a development executive for a number of years with the National Kidney Foundation, and that prepared us to use this continuous monitoring tool for a client of ours, and we can talk about it publicly, that being MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. MD Anderson, we had helped previously with using continuous monitoring in the accounts payable and in procurement space. What we do for MD Anderson now is in their fundraising office, in their development office. And what that means is we help them with data quality inside their donor master file, Tom, to make sure that you don't receive 2 or 3 solicitations, one to Tom Fox Law, one to Thomas Fox, and then a third one to perhaps Tom or Tommy. What we do is we look at names and addresses inside a series of files for them and identify relationships or possible relationships between existing data, donor information, and new files that they may want to integrate in, and again, to make sure that no duplicates occur. That has very interesting applications for FCPA and more broadly for denied party screening, because if you think about what we do in the denied party world, we want to make sure that the vendors and customers and consultants that we're working with are not on some sort of a politically exposed party list or a denied party screening database from the U.S. government. So our ability to use technology to match names and addresses and really what we call entities, to match those entities with denied party lists, has a wonderful bridge between what we do in the development world together with corruption compliance.
Joe, you used a phrase in there that I've heard you use several times, and that being data quality. And that's really not something that the compliance space, or certainly lawyers in the compliance space, focus on. You just began to touch on that, talking about denied parties, but the way you've explained it to me, it's actually much broader than that. It's the vendor master list, it's the denied parties, it's things like travel and entertainment expense. Can you explain how transaction monitoring and really your vision to monitor transactions goes across those spaces?
Certainly. Well, vendor data quality is really essential to using some sort of an automated tool for analytics. When you and I first got together and you were describing some of the things that you were having your team prepare for the federal monitors, you were having to review expense reports and new vendor information and disbursement information and prepare 3-ring binders of data for review by an external monitor. To the extent that all of that information is available digitally, why shouldn't the computer really bring the data together and prepare reports for review by that external party? So what we do with continuous monitoring software is we take data from expense reports, from accounts payable, from maybe HR or other data sets. We bring that data together and then we interrogate the data against a set of rules. Tell me about the dollar amount of these expenses. Who were the attendees at a business meal? It's not enough to say that you were entertained customer or prospect or guest on your expense report. Most organizations want to know first name, last name, company name, maybe the business purpose of the meal. So data quality, the focus there is simply to make sure that all of the expectations that we have about the data, to make sure that that gets recorded inside the information system. And to the extent that somebody has documented a transaction in a way that you would not be proud to show your compliance officer how the money was spent, we can send an email back to the individual asking for more detail so that the transaction can get documented in more complete form.
Joe, I've had Patrick Taylor from Oversight speak a couple of times on the podcast. And as you and I both know Patrick quite well and his tool quite well, and they've gone, they've really focused on the T&E portions of transactions. but you've been able to use those concepts to really a much broader analysis or monitoring, as we might say. And can you explain how you would use the Oversight tool to really have a much broader type of inquiry or oversight or monitoring?
Sure. Well, we're big fans of the technology from Oversight Systems. Kim and I were at Price Waterhouse, back in 2005, 2006 when we first got exposed to Oversight. And for me, who spent a lot of time in career corporate internal audit, the idea to have technology to pull the information together is something that I get very excited about. Their software is really quite effective. What we do with their software, though, just like you said, is to extend the software's capabilities really to deal with multiple data inputs from truly any data source. So they're what they call insights on demand. They are taking information out of expense reports and looking for insights related to policy compliance, maybe policy adherence is a better word, but that the expense report adheres to the expense policy guidelines inside a corporation. What we're doing with the software is expanding its capabilities and looking at data sources not only inside the corporation, but also external data sources as well. So one of the projects that we're working on with Oversight Technology, we take what are called denied party lists, either publicly available lists from places like the EPLS.gov or the SAM list from the federal government, and we're comparing names and addresses and passport information of known denied parties. We're comparing them to customer information, vendor information, employee information, and also attendees of those expense reports. So you can use Oversight to say, does breakfast plus lunch plus dinner exceed the daily maximum? And that certainly is an interesting and an important insight to have on a travel and entertainment audit. But when I think about the real risk that an organization may be facing, it's not how much money was spent on dinner, but rather who were the people that we were entertaining, what was the business purpose of that expense, and do we know that it was appropriate for us to be spending that amount of money for those guests. You mentioned, we bring an audit perspective. I would say that we bring an audit perspective, but also a data perspective for the problem. And again, it was not our idea to go to MD Anderson and help them with data quality as it related to fundraising. They had a problem. We talked about it, and we knew that we could implement continuous monitoring in that environment. You and I have met because there are business questions that you would like to answer in greater depth and in greater frequency by using data analysis, and the role of our firm is to connect those business questions that someone like you or another attorney would have, to connect those business questions with the underlying digital data. And once we've made that connection between the business questions and the data, we can answer that question daily, multiple times per day, or perhaps weekly, but in 100% depth as opposed to sampling. And that's really what the power of monitoring is all about.
Let me ask you to put on your corporate auditor hat, which I know you wore for some amount of time. And I would have to assume that as a corporate auditor, you've done a few audits in your time, so you understand really the deep dive and depth of an audit at various levels. And then one of the things that I try to talk about in terms of FCPA compliance is three prongs. What did you do to prevent it? What did you do to detect it? And then what did you do to remedy it? Certainly auditing can be part of the detection prong, but what I've and others have advocated is that this transaction monitoring or continuous monitoring that you've talked about now for several years with Visual Risk IQ can move to really a preventive and maybe even a predictive function. But as
Sure.
an internal auditor, if you received a report from someone like Visual Risk IQ, how would an internal auditor use that information that you've helped develop as Visual Risk IQ?
Sure. Well, it's all about 100% depth of analysis. So what we do is we look at a period, maybe 3 months or 6 months or a year's worth of financial data, and we're doing 100% comparison between the financial transactions and then the set of business rules. So instead of looking at a sample and saying 48 or 49 or 50 out of 50 expense reports appear to have been sufficiently documented, we're able to say 100,000, 150,000 expense reports were reviewed, and here were the 50 or 150 or 250 that perhaps did not have the quality or the completeness of documentation that policy would tend to expect. What we do by doing 100% review of all transactions is we shine the light on the business area that needs to really document things in a more complete way. That serves a very clear preventive role in an ongoing basis, because when we go out and we request additional support for those transactions from the employees that did not fill things out completely, they understand that there's an inspection function in place, and they understand that that all transactions are being reviewed. Understanding that all transactions are being reviewed causes them on their next expense report to document more completely who attended, what was the business purpose, etc. As well, it also helps because any questionable expense, any expense that might require pre-approval, they're that much more inclined to go get the approval as opposed to not next time the transaction may need to occur.
Let me turn to a little bit different subject now. Certainly from my perspective, it really sounds like a great tool and certainly an important tool, and one that the Department of Justice has talked about in the FCPA guidance and some opinion releases over the past couple of years. But how intrusive is continuous monitoring? What would you or your team or Visual Risk IQ have to do to come in and do something like this for a client?
It's very simple to map the data from the existing information systems into the continuous monitoring world. In fact, things are becoming much more cloud-based. So as companies would get comfortable with the technical controls we have in place, we're able to extract a data file from an existing information system and upload it in a secure way to a secure data center that's operating in the cloud. In terms of the level of effort that's required, most of that is on us. It's not on the company. We can accept a data file from almost any ERP system, SAP, Oracle, JD Edwards, Lawson, Great Plains. Chances are we've worked with it over the last 7 or 8 years. But even when we're working with a data source that we haven't worked with before, our experience is that it's well documented and easy enough to pull that information out. We have a current assignment that we're working on for a research organization, and we're taking vendor information and payment information and credit card information from an ERP system called Deltek. And with probably less than a day's worth of effort on our part and on the part of their database administrator, we've exported a year's worth of data into a file that's compatible and can be read by our monitoring application, and now we're producing exceptions for them to review in a way that's much easier for them to digest than as if they would perhaps buy the software system and install it in accounts. Again, we're relying on technology, and we use the cloud to specify the file. They prepare the file, we upload it, and then we process the data against a set of business rules.
Well, Joe, we're at the end of our time for this particular episode. I was wondering if someone wanted to get in touch with you or follow up with any questions they might have of some of what you've shared. How would they do that?
I'd like to think we're easy to get a hold of. Visual Riskiq is the company, so our website is visualriskiq.com. We've got a contact us form on the website, and the email will come directly to me and also my partner. Or you can reach me via email, joe.oringel, Oringel, at Visual Riskiq, or look me up on LinkedIn or Twitter at Visual Riskiq, or on LinkedIn as Joe Oringel. Thank you very much, Tom.
Well, Joe, I hope we can continue this conversation. I think it's not only important but a very valuable insight for folks to do. So I look forward to future episodes and podcasts with you, and hopefully we can even get one maybe on LSU football.
That would be A-OK with me. Thank you so much, Tom.
All right, thank you.